The Israelis continue to deny that any starvation is taking place. But I just read actually an article in Haaretz said they did. Okay, there are no reports out of Gaza because actually the Israelis are not letting any reporters into Gaza. They have killed 200 journalists. So, again, Haaretz can't get any of its own journalists in there. But what they did is they did a virtual tour of various hospitals, the hospitals that still remain and still function to some extent within Israel. And
You mean within Gaza?
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, within Gaza, right. Within Gaza. And they said that, it's just horrifying. They showed some images, quite a few. The doctors just took them on a virtual tour, from bed to bed, from ward to ward. And there was just, it seemed like just an endless, countless starving children in these wards. And you could see it's a horrible, it's very, very hard to actually to look at it. But they went through it in these different hospitals, and they just said this statement that, there's no starvation in Gaza, again, which the Israeli government insists on. It's just so absurd. And they'll say, well, the ones that have actually died, they had pre-existing conditions. Some of them did, but they almost certainly wouldn't have died if they hadn't been starved to death. And then the majority don't have any pre-existing conditions. There's one thing that you can see in this. There's many cases the family showed pictures of the same child like a year prior, and the child looked fine and was just like a normal kid at age. Now you're talking about like a 2-year-old that only weighs 10 pounds, or a 10-year-old that only weighs 35 pounds, or and you can imagine what they look like. I mean, they look like human skeletons, and they're just apathetic. They can hardly respond. They can only, that's the reality there. So the horror continues, and the aid seekers continue to be killed. So it's like one of these severely malnourished children in the hospital, or I guess it was a young man, he was suffering both from malnutrition, and he had a wound because he had attempted to go to one of these aid stations and got shot. And he had, both a head wound and I think a wound in the gut too. And, he was in a real bad state. And that just gives you right there the kind of the horror that they're living. It's a real nightmare. But now, as far as the operation against Gaza City, Gaza City prior to October 7th had a population of 700,000. And now has a population of 1.2 million, because so many have been driven out from other parts of Gaza, and they're refugees within the city. 1.2 million. And that's, the majority of the remaining population in Gaza. Now they all have to leave. They're being told to head south. They've already, the IDF has already moved up, has kind of completed some of the preliminary operations up to the edges of the city. They've already issued evacuation orders, but they recognize that a lot of these people are not going to flee. And that's what many of them are saying is, look, I've already been evacuated, like a half a dozen times or whatever. And, and I've had enough. I'm just staying. So that's what some of them are saying.
Or they don't have the strength, probably. If you're starving to death, how do you go to walk with your belongings,
right.
Food, water?
And they often find, they're told that there's a safe area. They go to the safe area and then they're attacked, So many of them are going to stay. And again, the IDF recognizes that. So the IDF's plan is that look, after they issue the evacuation orders, then they'll start firing artillery at the apartment buildings in Gaza City to encourage, as they put it, the remaining Gaza residents to evacuate. And then again, the Israeli defense minister said that, this is the plan. And the ultimate goal is actually to level all of Gaza City. Again, a city that had a population of 700,000 prior to the war, to level the entire city and make it uninhabitable, and just so that there's just no place for these people to return, and they'll just be sent. It's already, again, Gaza already had a very dense population, very densely populated area. They're going to be forced into even more crowded conditions in the south. And I think it's clear, again, that the hope is to just send them to someplace like South Sudan. Apparently the U.S. government is trying to help the Israelis to find a place to send the Gazans.
It's unbelievable. It's so evil. It's hard for me to just hearing you telling me about these kids that are starving, just bed after bed of starving children when there's almost an unlimited amount of food just a mile away across the border.
Right.
That it's just exceptionally cruel. I think even historically, I can't think of anything as cruel and inhumane as what is being done to the people of Gaza now. We talk about World War II all the time, the Holocaust. It's like, of course, this was awful. But over 8 million Germans died. They were running out of food too. It's like things were tough for everybody. Not saying and justifying anything, of course, but just the fact is that there is food. There's no reason for this to happen. Right. It's not like you have a scarce amount of resources and it's like, okay, we have to feed our own first. It's like, no, it's just intentional. And to do this to children, I mean, I just don't understand. If you're an Israeli and you have a family, you have children, how can you be okay with this? How can you hear what you're saying with it breaks my heart. It just hearing that just these kids that can't eat. I mean,
right.
It's just, I have little kids, little boys, just thinking like, if you can't feed them, just how painful it is, just that the crying and just watching them die. And you know that they're going to be damaged forever, even if you do able to get them food at this point. It's just unconscionably evil. I can't think of anything more horrific, and nobody's doing anything. This is what's so crazy. We all see it. Everybody knows it's happening and nobody does it. I can't believe the world is letting this happen. I just still can't understand it. Why can't anybody do anything? Why doesn't anybody do anything?
Well, again, the main reason I think is the United States is that here this military superpower is propping them up. I was just reading today that again there's $3.7 billion in emergency military aid. This is on top of everything else that's been given to Israel, has been approved. And much of that actually is interceptors, because so many of them were used up in the war with Iran. They're trying to get them to replenish their stocks of interceptors, but other munitions that are being used in Gaza too. It's just that it's the U.S. If the U.S. wasn't supporting Israel, this would never happen. Even if it couldn't go very far. I think it was just other countries would be, much more willing to maybe engage the Israelis militarily. But just the fact that you've got the U.S., that if you're going to go with war with Israel, you're also going to go to war with the U.S., that really changes everything.
I can't believe it. I mean, you're not really going to go to war with the U.S. I feel like if the U.S. gets more involved on behalf of Israel, there's going to be an uprising in this country. I really hope so.
Yeah,
I just don't see how anybody.
We're not there yet, and it's again. I mean, it's just like we're getting just. We're providing unconditional full support to Israel. We are completely complicit in all of this. There's absolutely no pressure for Israel to change its policies whatsoever. Quite the reverse. We're just saying if you want to ethnically cleanse Gaza, we'll back you up. That's your choice.
I can't. Yeah, it's sick. It's really sick. Something that scares me. Is just Trump's just sort of maybe megalomania. Maybe not megalomania is the right word, or maybe the God complex that's in him, because he said something regarding the Ukraine war, saying that I hope to be able to get into heaven by ending this war. It's like, okay, great. Ending a war is a good thing, but I have a feeling when it comes to Israel, he feels like fighting a war for Israel might get him into heaven. And I'm feeling that he's having this idea and he's thinking about it in these big sort of grand picture of himself, almost like as if he's the second coming, because, he had that tweet from Mike Huckabee as well. Just saying how like God gave you a purpose, you survived that assassination and you're here to do great things. And I just kind of feel like the Zionist have got him, and I mean he already is a Zionist, and so he believes in just maybe fulfilling this biblical prophecy that of Zionism, this heresy that's there, and And maybe he's thinking, I got to wind down the Ukraine war so I could focus on the holy war that I've been meant to do.
Right.
That's
Well, yeah, maybe in a sense, he's not a Christian Zionist per se, and he's not a religious person. I think that's clear. But he's a Zionist. In a way, it doesn't really matter. The secular Zionists and the religious Zionists, Jewish Zionists and Christian Zionists can all be equally devoted to the Zionist project.
Yeah, but he's thinking about heaven, and he's thinking he's old,
right.
so he's going to grasp. And if he doesn't have a found Christian founding that is solid, he might he's around Zionists. They're going to feed him the Christian Zionist version.
Yeah, and maybe not be Christian Zionism, but it's just Zionism according to Trump. It's the God Emperor, as the anointed one to to achieve the ultimate goals of Zionism.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you almost have to frame it in that way, because how else can you? I don't understand how anybody can justify what's happening in Gaza, any politician, unless the only way that they do it and what they try to do is just say that this is evil. This is these aren't humans. They are just, an evil plague on the earth. And then you put it in that kind of biblical sense almost. I feel like that's the only way you can possibly do it, without losing your humanity.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's, again, we know that Israeli leaders, including Netanyahu himself, have used and continue to use that kind of language. And many including prominent Israeli citizens, whether they're secular or religious, use that kind of language. You don't have to use that you don't have to be actually religious to have that belief, again, that somehow these are subhumans and not worthy of life. Again and again, Netanyahu uses this language of civilization versus barbarism, and they're the barbarians, and it's apparently that the children there are barbarians too. Again, the Israelis, including I point out there was this prosecutor in Nevada, an Israeli American citizen, that she actually posted. It was just like later they looked at her record of postings on, tweets, and found that she had made that. Again, there are no innocents in Gaza. That's a common refrain, within Israel. And she said that, and she said specifically, including the children. So they are fair game. I mean, unfortunately, that is the way that many Israelis, again, polls show really that a majority of Israelis think that they are, they're not fully human, and we have a right to kill them. They're all evil. They're all tainted by by anti-Semitism or something, and they need to be killed. I mean, that seems like a really extreme, wild statement, but that's what the polls show, and that's what the conduct of this war shows. We just got the statistics again. 83% of those killed, and that's probably an understatement. Are civilians.
Right. Yeah, that's according to Israel itself.
Right.
83, the most moral army in the world, as they say. 83% civilian deaths, according to them. Yeah, I think that Nevada case with the Attorney General is an interesting one to happen when it did after the Epstein case. And people are looking at the relationship between Israel and the United States, and a lot of people are questioning, why it seems like Israel has a lot of influence over here in America. And then you have this case where you have an Israeli citizen that is the Attorney General of Nevada, that lets an Israeli that is in the Netanyahu cabinet that's committing war crimes, that has that is charged with cybersecurity, that comes here and is arrested in a pedophile sting, on the backdrop of the Epstein stuff, and then he's just released. It just, I think the timing is perfect in this sense. It just, everybody is noticing. And it just, even, do you know who Megyn Kelly is? I know you don't watch mainstream news.
Right, I know who she is. Yeah.
Right, but she's like the conservative evangelical woman, the Zionist, basically. She's been hardcore Zionist. She's a conservative evangelical white woman. That's her audience. She had Marjorie Taylor Greene on, and Megyn Kelly's doing some noticing. She's just saying, they were trying to get me to go here, and she admitted my perception of Israel has changed now. And she's somebody that's always just been hardcore in that camp. And then the response from the Zionists, people like Mark Levin immediately say, drop her. Or there's all this huge drive to say that she's being paid by Qatar and all these NGOs, and she's being funded by Hamas. And it just, she's very still pro-Israel, but she's saying, like, there's something weird. How come, AIPAC is not registered as a foreign agent? They have this undue influence, and all of my colleagues are being told to go on this tour to Israel and to say these things. She's even saying it, like, in my mind, that's a huge breakthrough.
Yeah,
like,
no, it is.
Her audience, or all her audience, they're all Zionists. They're all pro-Israel, or they used to be. And I think a lot of people are they're having this cognitive dissonance in their mind, and as evangelical Christians, and they're figuring things out.
I think that's right. That's there are cracks in the facade, and it may come crashing down at some point. I think it will. It's just a question of when. But those are all very encouraging signs. And again, it's like on the left, it seems like the battle has already been pretty much won, at least among the younger generation. The older leftists, maybe no, they just have to pass on. But the younger leftists have almost completely rejected Israel. But the encouraging thing is that you're seeing real signs of this happening on the right too. And it seems like, eventually, and maybe not so eventually, but in the near future, Israel is going to lose the entire younger generation, left and right. And then it's you say, okay, maybe you can hang on to power for a while, but just because the establishment, is still in your pocket, but this cannot last. It's not sustainable. I mean, again, it's just that the perception of Israel has changed so radically, and again throughout the world and among the younger generation, but even in it's getting through to people like Megan Kelly, and that is encouraging. Now, they still have a ways to go, I know, but it's encouraging. You would have thought that maybe a year ago you wouldn't have heard any of this, but now it's happening.
No, she's been really going after protesters on campuses and these people. She's been very much on Israel's side. So hearing her say that was huge to me. I'm just like, things are changing, but you think there would be this realization within Israel that even if they do successfully ethnically cleanse all of Gaza, they have forfeited their future because of this, because they've lost the world. Do they not have a recognition? Do they not understand that they rely on the United States completely to survive, to do all their things? It's just the hubris that they have to just be able to do this with our money and not even care about what we think and what we say, and how they're dragging our country, our name through the mud, and we're all tainted now with this horrific genocide, and having to see these pictures of these starving kids. This is what how could they think that we would be okay with this? And that don't they understand that, they need to keep us in their good graces, and they just don't care?
Well, I think they all understand that they really do depend on the U.S. Netanyahu understands that. I think even Smotrich and Ben Gvir and all those people understand it. But they have, I guess it's a big part of it is hubris. They've had this unconditional support for decades, and they've come to see it as just sort of an immovable fact. It's just like the U.S. will always do what we tell them to do. I think that they've started thinking that way, just reflexive. There used to be a caution, like, okay, we can't really overstep our boundaries. We can't be too obvious, whatever. We got to be careful in the kind of rhetoric we use. That was the older Israel. They did terrible things, but they were cautious about it. They understood that it was that they needed to constantly protect and improve or repair their own image. After when things went wrong and occasionally some bad news came out, they worked really, really hard to try to provide explanations and, if necessary, apologies. And it was just like a bad apple or whatever, a mistake, and we'll learn from it. But now that's all gone. Again, we've seen it. It's we've seen it happen, just even during the course of, the last nearly 2 years since October 7th, there has just been this growing recklessness on the part of the Israelis. It just seems like they've thrown caution to the winds. They don't care. They don't try to hide anything. Well, they lie openly about the starvation, but they don't really even work all that hard at it. And I think you can only explain it by a kind of extraordinary hubris and a sense of entitlement. And it's just like there's just this, and I think it's just a product of, again, decades of this unconditional support. There are many times in the past where they felt like we got to be careful, we might lose the Americans, but the Americans, no matter what, always supported them. And I think that's led, in good part, that explains why they're behaving the way they are now. But it's obviously quite a mistake. And there are some of the older generation of Zionists recognize that. I think even Ehud Barak, the former prime minister, and some former generals have really rung the alarm bells and say Israel's in serious, serious danger now. And he said, we got to stop this right now, or Israel's never going to recover from this. They understand the damage that's been done to their reputation, but it seems like the younger generation in Israel just doesn't even seem to understand it. They just have this sense of invulnerability, invincibility, but that's a mistake.
How much longer do you see this going on in Gaza? I mean, we're coming up to 2 years pretty soon. Is it just? I mean, how long do we have to watch this genocide unfold?
Right. Well, this Gaza City operation, which I believe has been named Gideon's Chariot 2, is supposed to extend into 2026. And I think they're calling up 60,000 reservists for the first phase. The idea is eventually they're going to, fairly quickly, they plan to just completely level the city and well, if so-called evacuate the residents. First scare them away, those that don't respond to the evacuation orders, to start firing artillery until they run. And then if they don't run, they'll just be buried in the rubble. I think that's what's going to happen. The whole city is supposed to be reduced to rubble. That's the plan. And then there's going to be a period of several months where they're just like trying to completely destroy Hamas's infrastructure, which is largely underground. So that's going to go on to 2026. And then I don't know if there's a plan to do anything, what the next stage is going to be. But that's the current state. I think it is really to completely ethnically cleanse northern Gaza. And then we'll see. And then, there are efforts to find some place overseas for them. I don't know that those will bear fruit there. The Egyptians have very strongly stated recently, and I think, in fact, to send troops into the Sinai, even against, in violation of a treaty that they had with the Israelis. Now, it must be said, the Israelis have already violated the treaty by cutting off, or taking control of the Philadelphia corridor, right along there, the border between Gaza and Egypt. But the Egyptians have now sent troops because they're afraid that the Israelis are going to try to push the Gazans into Egypt.
Horrible for these people. They can't believe they're just trapped in this hellhole. And then nobody's helping them, and they're just being starved to death. Artillery shells, airstrikes, snipers, machine gun fire.
I have to say the Egyptian government is to a great extent complicit in this. They've condemned what Israel has done, but
I would expect that people in Egypt would just rise up. I mean,
right.
It's just when you see such unspeakable evil right next door, I feel like you have a moral obligation to fight it.
Right.
And I'm kind of surprised that I know Hezbollah has been very brave, but
I don't understand entirely. Of course, the Egyptians had their own uprising back in 2011, and they did have elections, and it was a Muslim Brotherhood government was elected, but then that was overthrown. And I think after that, it seemed like the spirit of resistance within Egypt was crushed. And so I'm sure there's a great deal of anger, but maybe there's also an equal or greater amount of despair and just sense of helplessness there.
Yeah, it's so sad talking about Gaza. I just can't believe that we are where we are and nobody's done anything. I mean, you and I, we've both been to the West Bank on separate occasions. But just my interactions with Palestinians, they're so nice. They're just very, even though they're living in hard conditions there in the West Bank, they're just such nice people, and they have every right to live. I just don't understand how we've been able to demonize just such a, just people living on their land that they've lived forever, and they can't, and they're just being slaughtered, and nobody's helping them.
Yeah. Oh no, it's true. One thing is just observing, firsthand the lives that they live there. And we're talking about the West Bank again, and this was several years ago. It's now much worse, but even back then it was very, very bad. Roughly 15 years ago, 14 years ago that I was there. I found myself thinking, yeah, I might have become a suicide bomber living under these conditions. It's really horrible. I mean, it's amazing that not more people just crack, snap.
Right, right. They want to say, like, oh, they're all terrorists. It's amazing how pacifist they really are. How they really take a lot. They turn the other cheek so many times. And then one person, after their brother's killed or their home gets taken, throws a rock, and then they say, "Oh, look at these terrorists," and they throw them in jail forever.
Yeah.
And just going through these checkpoints, the constant humiliation, it's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Israel is. There's no redemption for it.
No, I'm afraid. I'm afraid not. I think it's the society has gone past the point of no return, and in the end, I don't know. It's just like however you look at it, it's not going to be pretty how it ends.
Do you think that how much longer do you think it will go on before there's basically what we're hoping for? I don't know if we're hoping for, but I mean, when we saw Iran go strike Israel, I think everybody was just like, okay, finally somebody's intervening and doing something, and it stopped. And now it's just this weird waiting game, and you're just wondering, like, is that what we need to hope for? Is we just got to wait for Iran to come back in and teach Israel a lesson? I mean, but do we have to wait until they kill 1 million more people or something? Like, what's
I don't know. I guess I had to admit that I take absolutely no pleasure in the deaths of any Israelis. But just when I saw the buildings being hit, it's just like finally they're having at least suffering some of the consequences of their own actions. They ought to. This is something hopefully that can wake them up and make them maybe at least proceed with more caution in the future. That's in the end like nothing. Maybe that's the only thing that will cause Israel to maybe pull back, conceivably. But again, there are a lot of crazies there in charge of the government. If they feel like they're starting to lose the war, then they may look at the nuclear option. That's the scary thing.
yeah.
That's the truth, So I just be careful what you wish for. I just don't.
I know, but I just feel like this is the end conclusion that's happening, and it's just so awful that we have to watch this genocide unfold before our eyes until it happens. Because I think I have a feeling that Trump is trying to end the war in Ukraine so he can pivot to Iran and focus on Iran. I saw that there was a U.S. general was just fired because he had a report that went out that said, "Hey, the Iranian nuclear sites weren't destroyed," and Trump just fired him. But this story won't die. We said what we were going to do is just completely obliterate their sites. I think we'll find out that's not. There's going to pressure to build back up from Israel to strike again. Right, so we're just building that up again, and then meanwhile in the background we're just watching a genocide in Gaza, just more and more children starving to death every single day until the inevitable clash. I feel like with Iran, and then Israel is starting to really collapse and suffer, and then they start setting off nukes. That's where we're headed, and it's almost like I'm just tired of waiting. I almost need to fast forward because this is what's going to happen no matter what.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I wouldn't say that's what's going to happen no matter what, but there is a real chance of it. I mean, again, I think there is a real chance that that's the road we're going to go down. Again, this war between Israel and Iran is going to reignite. I think both sides are expecting that it will. There's talk within Iran, kind of interestingly, say that this time maybe we should be the ones to strike first, because you have kind of an advantage when you strike first. Again, Israel took advantage of Iran. Launched a stealth attack and caught him by surprise, caught him napping, and did a great deal of damage during that first day or two. And the Iranians, at least there's talk within Iran. I don't know if there's anybody, decision makers are really seriously considering this, but they're saying that maybe this is how we should retaliate. We shouldn't wait to get to suffer another surprise attack. Maybe we should be the ones that launch it. But both sides are gearing up for, I think, the next phase of this war. Again, like I told you about the $3.7 billion in U.S. aid, a lot of that is just to replenish those interceptor stocks that were drawn down during the 12-day war. And then there are reports, it's not clear, exactly what the Iranians are doing, but I guess the most recent report saying that they're getting a lot of help from the Chinese, and I guess a certain amount from the Russians too. I don't know, exactly what the proportions are. Of course, the Russians have their hands full in Ukraine, so it may be that this is a place for the Chinese to step in.
Yeah, I wish I would see some moves from China and Russia, India sanctioning Israel. I mean, at least throw in some economic muscle, to put some pressure on them.
Well, like India has actually had kind of has tended to tilt towards Israel. Now that may be changing. It probably is. Again, Russia had pretty good relations with Israel. They didn't really tilt toward them. They've always supported the Palestinian state and that kind of thing, but they tried to be as neutral as possible. But after October 7th, they found that not to be possible, and they have, relations between Russia and Israel have certainly suffered. Have become much less friendly. But last I heard, anyway, that's India. Probably within the BRICS, India is the most Israel friendly. But as we can see, even those countries and individuals, that used to be lean towards Israel or were, even strong Israel supporters, have begun to move away from that position.
Okay, Dad. I think we can end it there.
Okay.
Yeah, we're living through history right now, and we are on the wrong side. Our countries are. So I think it's very important that while we're living through this history, that you speak out against it and show that when you look back, tell your grandkids what you did during this time, that you weren't part of this, you spoke out against this, that this is not okay. This is something evil that's being done on our watch. So everybody keep on speaking out. That's all we can do. Okay, Dad. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.